Alexander had been married for 6 years, when fate threw him a surprise in the form of his future mistress. Imagine this. While stuck in traffic, he accidentally rear-ended Amelia's car. Not a bad move, right? But Alexander, being a charming guy, tried to smooth things over with the lady he just hit. Among other things, he reluctantly offered her a bite to eat at a nearby establishment. Surprisingly, Amelia agreed. A few years passed, and now they are regulars at parties, telling everyone about their fateful accident and laughing merrily about it. Amelia likes to banter with her husband, claiming that he organized the whole accident to impress her. After a while, Alexander managed to convince his better half to quit his 9-to-5 job and pursue his hobbies. He loved walking into a happy home where his wife was content and the smell of dinner was in the air. Amelia found joy in her hobbies, even if they only brought in a small amount of money. But they were both happy with everything. Amelia's birthday was approaching, a significant day for her, though she didn't like to celebrate it. She preferred things to be quiet, just between her and Alexander. Family-wise, it was just the two of them. Her relationship with her folks was strained, to say the least. She felt like she had rushed into marriage just to get away from them. Her mother was an absolute stickler, stuck in the past with her old views. There was no changing her mind. Eventually, Amelia gave up trying to argue with her and just drifted away. When a chance to escape came up, she grabbed it with both hands. This year, however, she wanted to party hard, so she decided to gather her friends and go to a restaurant to celebrate her birthday. After the party, she felt warm and fuzzy, and now wonders why she didn't make it an annual celebration her. Hubby grinned understandingly. He figured next year she'd opt for a more modest event, just for the two of them, maybe a fancy dinner or a trip on an airplane somewhere. But for now, Alexander was genuinely glad it brought a smile to her face. One of her buddies had slipped Amelia a ticket to some cool photographer's photo exhibit. She didn't remember the guy's name, but her friend raved about his work so much that Amelia couldn't resist checking it out. The pictures were mostly of adults, and Amelia went from one picture to the next, feeling a little awkward and even blushing at times. "I got a hearty laugh out of that one," said a guy who approached her as she was looking at one of the works with a silly grin. No, it's just hard for me to put my feelings into words." "This exhibit is totally out of the ordinary," she tried to explain. The guy smirked as well and held out his hand. "I'm Lucas. Nice to meet you. Are you an artist?" "My bad if I stepped on your heels." "I'm Amelia," she shook his hand in return. They chatted some more about his work, about art in general, and then Lucas had to bow out. After all, he couldn't play favorites with his guests. Amelia couldn't take her eyes off him. The photographer was a real hero. His fashion sense was striking against the usual crowd, and his hair looked like it had been styled by a gust of wind. Every now and then, he would cast a glance in Amelia's direction, and whenever their eyes met, they exchanged small smiles. It was all new and exciting to her. She hadn't felt this kind of odd in years, hadn't even thought about throwing glances or flirting with someone. It was like she was 16 again, and she loved it. Immersed in her thoughts, Amelia settled down on a bench in front of a massive poster of 2 men and 1 woman. At that moment, Lucas approached her again. He lowered himself beside her and offered her a glass, overflowing with champagne. "No need to worry," he grinned. "There's nothing suspicious in there." Amelia chuckled and took a sip. They fell into a cozy silence, just enjoying the champagne and looking at the artwork. But before she knew it, the alcohol hit her like a freight train. It came to her that she hadn't eaten anything since this morning. Still, she couldn't bring herself to turn down the 2 glasses Lucas had poured her out of sheer politeness. "I have some more posters hidden in storage," the photographer spoke suddenly. "Thought I'd hang them some other time. Want to check them out today?" Amelia agreed as much as she could and followed Lucas to the warehouse. Everything was ready. Alice heard the lock click behind her, turned to Lucas, and met his lips. The kiss quickly grew into something more, and soon she was lying on the couch with the man unbuttoning his pants, whispering to her, "I want it different." Hearing this, the man grinned understandingly and granted her wish. "I want to take a picture of you. Let's meet again when I'm in town," he said as he got dressed. After the meeting, Amelia pondered as the man persuaded her. She finally gave in and agreed to come to the studio the next day. The photos were styled by Lucas, which meant they were intended for adults. He asked Amelia to undress first, down to her underwear, and then convinced her to take it off afterward as well. Afterward, in the dressing room, he took her under his arm. They said goodbye, and Lucas promised to send her the photos as soon as they were processed. But Amelia never received them. Instead, in the evening, Alexander received an email from an unfamiliar address. The letter contained files and a short note. "Your wife knows how to please men." Alexander trembled with fear and clicked on the first picture. A picture of his wife, completely undressed in an interesting pose, appeared on the screen. He looked at a few more pictures, then closed the laptop. His heart was pounding frantically in his chest. He couldn't understand what was happening or how to react to it. He rushed home at full speed, almost interrogating her as soon as he crossed the threshold. He pressed her, begging her to tell him the truth. He could see that she understood what he was implying, but refused to admit it. No one wants to admit their mistakes. Finally, Alexander screamed so loudly that he thought the dishes in the kitchen might ring. A frightened Amelia burst into tears, confessing everything to her husband. Alexander looked at her with utter bewilderment. He couldn't understand what was missing in his marriage. What had made her take this step? He looked at her and saw a completely different person in front of him. It seemed that all her familiar gestures, words, and expressions suddenly belonged to a stranger, a person unknown to him. "You disgust me," he said in disgust, as his wife sobbed quietly. "I'm sorry, it was a mistake," she gasped between sobs. But her husband only shook his head in response. There could be no forgiveness, and she knew it. Her husband had always told Amelia that if something like this happened, she shouldn't expect it to go unnoticed. He gave her a day to pack her things and find a place to move. She had no choice but to return to her parents, where her mother immediately expressed her disappointment and worthlessness, adding that she expected nothing more from her. Since she could not get support from her parents, Amelia felt even worse. Alexander cut off all contact with her. She tried to find Lucas just to talk to him, but he didn't respond. Later, Amelia had to get a job because she hadn't needed one before. Now, when she came home late at night, she would fall on her bed, crying for her lost happiness, and fall asleep. Every morning, she hoped that when she opened her eyes, she would realize that everything that had happened between them was just a dream. Cheating Secrets podcast like me.